Welcome to teleSUR English from Caracas, Venezuela. I am Janet Perez Moya. Today we have a special interview with an honorable guest, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Very welcome to teleSUR, very welcome to Venezuela.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored.
It's an honor for us. Doctor, in recent times you state the erosion of the sovereignty has never restrained the interests of the powerful. In the 21st century, in this decade, how are we as Latin American countries in the face of these powerfuls of the world?
Well, we go, first of all, to what are the fundamental principles at stake. We have all signed on to the Charter of the United Nations.
Yes.
And fundamental to the Charter are the following precepts. Equality of states. Of course, there's a little inequality which is embedded in the Charter because you have a Security Council with 5 permanent members which have a veto. But the precept of the equality of states. Non-intervention, non-interference in the internal affairs of another country. The peaceful settlement of disputes.
Yes.
And the challenges and the difficulties and the problems and the conflicts in the world must be solved through multilateral means. The principal multilateral institution being the United Nations, but there are other multilateral institutions. Those are fundamental. What happens is this, is that some powerful countries, when they signed on to these precepts, it doesn't appear as though they meant them. That the weak and the small and the poor were to take those precepts seriously, but they were not to take them seriously. Like, for instance, in our hemisphere, the repeated interventions in the internal affairs of countries by the United States of America flies in the face of the fundamental precepts of the Charter of the United Nations. This is not an anti-American point, because I'm not anti-American. St. Vincent and Grenadines, we are friends of all, and we strive for a better world. But as a fact, the continuous intervention in the internal affairs in Cuba, in Venezuela, it has happened recently in Bolivia when you had a change of government. In fact, a coup carried out by electoral observer mission by, yes, the Organization of American States. That's a unique form of intervention. The intervention in 2009 in Honduras with Manuel Zelaya, where a constitutional coup is carried out, when a good liberal woman was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. The intervention, the famous one, of course, in 1973, with the overthrow of the Allende government. And that was organized and planned in Washington, in the State Department. There's no dispute about it. Kissinger has accepted it. All objective observers and writers have accepted this. And before that, you can go back to 1953 in Guatemala, an event which galvanized a personality from Argentina, like Che Guevara, with the overthrow of the Arbenz regime. So that we have had a succession of these interventions. It is as though the Monroe Doctrine of the early 19th century is yet to be exorcised.
It has 2 centuries now.
It is yet to be exorcised in the minds, in the brains, in the beings of those who make policy in the United States of America. And, you know, one of the problems which they seem to have is that ideas from the past weigh on their brains like a nightmare. In the brains of the living, it's like a nightmare. And then, of course, contemporary contradictions in the global political economy and sheer naked politics on the part of forces within the United States of America compel some of these interventions. Let us take Cuba. What they're doing in Cuba is completely illegal. That is denounced annually at the United Nations by a near unanimous majority.
185 this year.
At the General Assembly of the United Nations. But why do they do it? Well, you see, there are a lot of anti-revolutionary, anti-Castro personalities inside of South Florida. And Florida is an important state.
For the elections,
For
the
elections. Opinion. It's important for the presidency. After California, New York, Texas, it's Florida. So it is vital. George W. Bush became president of the United States because of South Florida. And many presidencies hang on Florida because of Florida. And many presidencies hang on South Florida. If the Cuban Americans and the Venezuelans, they were distributed evenly over the 50 states in the United States, they would not have that impact. So it's important for presidential politics, congressional and senatorial politics, and important for state for a governor. And there seems to be, when you're powerful, an irrationality grips you. And it takes a long time for you to have a catharsis, a cleansing of this. People are bewildered, right-thinking people who are very good friends of the United States of America, like, for instance, Europeans. You don't have a single European country voting with America on that particular resolution, not even Great Britain. Yes. So the same thing you have currently with Venezuela. These unilateral, illegal sanctions, which, among other things, criminalize the financial system because of the power of the United States in the financial system, because of the SWIFT system of transfers of monies, the power of the United States dollar as the veritable reserve currency of the world. All of these things conjoined. And what happens is this. You not only harm Venezuela, but you harm other countries, because it is because of Donald Trump's unilateral illegal sanctions that the Petro-Carib Agreement, initiated by Hugo Chavez of blessed memory, that it is because of the sanctions that this agreement fell apart, because there could be no payment in dollars. And all the ridiculous things that happened afterwards about naming somebody as president of Venezuela. What's the name of the fellow again? Guaido. I often forget his name.
Yes.
Because it's such an unimportant figure that you tend to forget. And 50-odd countries recognized Guaido, and the Americans would trumpet that. But you have 193 countries. What about the other 140 in the United Nations? And of course, you have 8 billion people in the world. Of the 53, they're really North America, Europe, and 1 or 2 countries in Latin America, amounting in total to 1 billion people. So 1 billion people in the world out of 8 billion said there was somebody, president other than Nicolas Maduro, because the United States of America wanted it that way. It is absolutely absurd. And we must tell our friends who are the Americans that they must not engage in this absurdity and stop this intervention in people's affairs.
Prime Minister, you also have been a strong supporter of reparatory justice for the descendants of millions of slaves in Latin America. You think we will see a real answer sometime from the metropolis? Speaking of, we are talking now about the United States and all the metropolis in general.
It's not only reparations for the enslavement of African bodies, it's also reparations for native genocide.
Also.
Because the British colonizers carried out large-scale genocide against the indigenous Kalinago and Garifuna people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And thousands whom they didn't kill, they sent into forced exile into Central America, and you find their descendants now in Belize, in Nicaragua, in Guatemala, and in Honduras, where they see St. Vincent and the Grenadines as their spiritual home. Uramin, that's the original name of St. Vincent and the Grenadines by the indigenous people. And even the current king, the new king in the United Kingdom,
Charles III.
Charles III, King Charles III, is a very good man on climate change. And you notice we are very balanced and fair to everybody. He himself said at the opening of the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference in June this year in Kigali in Rwanda, that the time has come for an intelligent conversation to be had, a sensible conversation to be had on reparations. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the head of the Anglican Church, the established church in the United Kingdom, in 2007, he called for reparations because the wealth in Europe, the wealth in Britain, was built on the backs of the system of slavery in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, we don't want any confrontation with anybody on this. The arguments which we make are compelling. They are unanswerably strong. What we want is to have a conversation in accordance with an agenda for reparatory justice. And it has to be separate and distinct from any other forms of obligations which they may have in relation to countries of the developing world. Now, from CARICOM, from the Caribbean community, we have set up a regional CARICOM reparations commission. We have adopted a 10-point agenda on reparations, and we are pushing it. The British government has written formally, and what we are continuing to do is to work in the areas of diplomacy, work politically, educate people, but of course, there are steps we can take before the International Court of Justice, because there are international conventions which they would have established their obligation to address the legacy, the developmental legacies, or rather the underdevelopmental legacies of native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies. Reparations is not to look for African peoples, their descendants, or the native genocide, the victims of native genocide, to look for their descendants and give them each a check.
An amount of money.
No. That's not what this is about. This is about a national matter, because the legacy of underdevelopment for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, the legacies are evident throughout. I can talk in detail, we don't have the time for that, but I make the point unequivocally that the legacy or the legacies in physical infrastructure, in health, in education,
Economy.
the economy, in culture, in memorials, in all of these things, that they are legacies of underdevelopment, which we currently suffer from today, in addition to what are all the contemporary challenges arising from monopoly capitalism overseas, and all the challenges connected to climate change and matters of war and peace globally. This is a separate and distinct set of legacies for which there must be reparatory justice. And this is an agenda item which is not going to go away. We're going to continue to talk about it until success comes.
This is the question. We will be heard, we will be listened, we will get the reparation. We can talk about it in another interview, Prime Minister, but I also want to ask you now. You mentioned a multilateral mechanism for Latin America, and you said, like, for example, CARICOM for the Caribbean countries, but it's also ALBA for all the Latin American countries. What do you think about the solution for us as a country to face together the problems we have in all Latin America and the Caribbean, especially talking about environmental problems also?
Well, first of all, arising from the 19th century to the present time, there are two trajectories as to how the Caribbean and Latin America should function in the hemispheric system and globally. One comes from the Monroe Doctrine. The other one comes from Simon Bolivar. And those trends have been reinforced or diluted, as the case may be, over the years by different contending forces. Today is the question, are we going to have integration on the basis of a neoliberal agenda dominated by monopoly capitalism, by inequity, by a kind of modern enslavement, a variant of it, and have people interfere in your internal affairs and don't allow you to pursue another possible and better path? And Latin America and the Caribbean decided that we should pursue an alternative and better path. And that is why we have formed these organizations like CELAC, which is for political advocacy, the Community of States of the Caribbean and Latin America and the Caribbean, which consists of all the states in our hemisphere, save and except the United States of America and Canada. And then, of course, there's ALBA TCP. And there are institutions within ALBA which have been very critical. Institutions like PetroCaribe, which has resumed. Institutions like the ALBA Bank, like teleSUR, work in the field of education, what your country, Cuba has done in relation to health and the question of miracle mission, you know. All of these things have been put together for us to improve our lives, our livelihoods, and production within the interests of our people. That is fundamental. Now, I can't take St. Vincent and the Grenadines and lift it up and carry it to Vladivostok. The largest city in my country is Brooklyn. Of my nationals is Brooklyn. I can't ignore the United States of America. They're a powerful influence on us through communications, technology, trade, investments, and the like. But that doesn't mean that I must be a vassal. It doesn't mean that you must prevent me or dissuade me or shackle me from acting in an independent manner in the interests of our own people's humanization.
And the decision of the people of each country.
Absolutely. It is a very straightforward proposition. But it seems as though the ruling class, both economic and political in the United States of America, they have not grasped this. But they're confronted by an immense contradiction in their country, or a bundle of immense contradictions. The bulk of the people today in the United States are dissatisfied with the old order. But they're not yet clear as to what the new and better path should be. The dominant economic and political classes know and realize that they cannot continue to rule in the old way because of the dissatisfaction of the people. And they themselves have not yet figured out a better way, a different way to rule. They're seeking to see if they could amend the way they're ruling. But the people are saying, we don't like all the various amendments which you are suggesting.
And they always.
And the contradictions arising from all of this contribute and spill over because of the power of the United States globally and contribute to global turmoil. I am saying this in Venezuela today on teleSUR, not as someone who is not a friend of America. I'm saying it as a great friend of America. And I want those who are listening to say, well, perhaps Ralph has an important point there which we should give some consideration to. And if that can somehow get into the consciousness of those who are relevant in all the circumstances, maybe it may be of some help. Someone
listen. Prime Minister, thank you for being with us. And if I can summarize this interview, is that with the sentence that we are better together. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure for us.
Thank you.
We say all of you goodbye, and of course stay with teleSUR English. I am Janet Perez Moya. It was a pleasure for me to inform you and share this minute. Goodbye. Prime Minister, thank you.